Okay, so why do you as the parent need to be involved in transition planning? First of all, you're the expert on your own child. No one knows that student, that child, better than you do. And you have accurate, quality, and valuable information to provide as part of the IEP team in that transition planning. You will be the one constant factor, the one thing that stays consistent in your child's life throughout the whole process, because teachers will change and sometimes schools will change, and certainly other people in the process will change as the process moves along. But you are consistent, and you're the person that can follow through and make sure that what gets discussed in 1 year and 1 grade gets built into the meeting and continues throughout the whole process. You also share your values. So you influence how the planning process continues in terms of how you handle things. And you can encourage your student to speak up for himself. You can be supportive if a student wants to try some things that maybe some members of the IEP team feel are not warranted. You have the opportunity to be a powerful force in your child's life, and this is one of the ways that plays out. Parents are very important in the transition planning process. I think some of these I've talked about before. Certainly, you help your child to become more self-sufficient and self-determined, and you can back up your child's decisions. So if your child wants to try something out and the school is reluctant, you can be the one who says, no, I think we ought to give him a shot at this. And then, you know, if a mistake is made or the decision is not the correct one and has to be revisited later on, that's okay too, because there's still growth and learning that occurs in that process. And you're the ones that can be there to say, you know, everybody makes mistakes. Just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and get on with it. So that's an important part of learning, because we all know that mistakes will be made at some point. Better to do it while you have a lot of support and a team of people gathered around you. And finally, parents can support their child's dreams. So maybe everything isn't going to come out exactly like we want. That's life. But you can be supportive of giving your children, your child, an opportunity to try things out as we go along. Okay, so what does the transition plan involve? First, we want to talk about what your child, what the student's post-secondary employment or career goals are. So some students may have really specific ideas about what they want to do in terms of a job. Others maybe have not ever had an opportunity to think about it and don't really know. So partly you're going to look at what do we think the possibilities are, what do we think that this student might like to do, and then help write a plan that allows the student to explore that thought or that goal. So it's a process. You don't have to decide today what you're going to do for the rest of your life, but let's decide some things about the direction you want to go and what kinds of activities need to happen to support you in going in that direction. What are the education and training goals that might go along with the career choices or employment choices? So if my son or daughter decides that being a veterinarian is the best thing ever, and that's what he or she wants to try, then instead of saying, gosh, you know, that's a whole lot of school, you have to have really good grades, instead of putting up barriers, then let's talk about, okay, what kinds of things would you need if you were going to be a veterinarian? Because in many cases, students themselves will regulate that and will make decisions based on practical, reasonable information as they go along. So don't thwart it right from the beginning, but say, let's look at what you would need to do in order to become a veterinarian. And let's talk about, is the reason you think you would like to be a veterinarian because you really like working with animals, and if that's the case, then let's explore some other possibilities of working with animals. And let's also give you a chance to actually get out and work with animals in some form or fashion so that you have an opportunity to actually see what it means to do this idea that you have in your head. You also need to think in terms of what kind of help or transition services will my child need in order to live as independently as possible. So perhaps we're not talking right at the beginning about the student moving away from home, but if the student expresses interest in living on his own or her own at some point, then we need to be talking about what has to be in place for that to happen. School time is a safe time, so you have at least 3 years during transition planning in school to talk about these things, to look at what has to be in place for them, and to begin to carry out some activities that move us forward. That should be done as part of the transition planning process. Who is on the team? Who can help when we get started with transition planning? Well, obviously, teachers need to be involved. The people that have spent time working with your student, people who know what skills and strengths the student has, but also knows where extra attention needs to be paid. There might be other representatives of school districts. So, for example, there may be some evaluation and test results that need to be discussed and taken into consideration as you plan. So people who administered those tests or did those assessments would need to be invited to explain what kind of results they got and what those results mean. Might need some other professionals. So if your child has had some mental health counseling, then the counselor may need to be involved. If your child needs some assistive technology or uses assistive technology, then someone who's familiar with that might also need to be involved, depending on what the plans are. If your child is going to be using assistive technology after he graduates in order to get a job or to be more independent in terms of living, then you probably need to be looking at what other kinds of assistive technology need to be in place in order for that to happen. And then certainly in terms of the school district, there needs to be someone who can commit resources. So if we're going to try to get the student out to do some job training and job shadowing, then we're going to need to know who's going to be responsible for going with that student, for setting that up, for transportation, those kinds of things. So someone who can help make all that happen needs to be included in the transition planning team. And then we might also want someone from Voc Rehab, because the rehabilitation services can offer resources to a student who is going to graduate and go on to some form of employment, and that can include things like helping with the cost of school, helping with transportation to a job site, maybe even a job coach or some other kinds of counseling and help with actually getting a job. So it's important that someone from Voc Rehab be at the table for at least part of that planning process. I talked before about adult service providers. So if your son or daughter is going to be on the home and community-based services waiver, then someone from a service provider might be there to talk about that and provide more information about that. Perhaps an independent living agency representative, someone from an institution of higher education. So maybe your son or daughter would like to attend community college. It would be important to have someone come and talk about what he or she needs to know and do in order to get into community college. Maybe if your child has a dual diagnosis, so has a developmental disability and a behavioral health diagnosis, then you might need someone there from one or both of those divisions of the Department of Human Services to talk about what they have to offer. Transition specialists. We do have a transition specialist in this area, and he can be very helpful in terms of this planning process. And then finally, you might need an advocate. So someone, for example, from our community parent resource center, or CPRC, might attend to help with the transition planning process. Those are all possibilities.